Hey everybody, Lieutenant Joe and Marisa Joy here for our segment, Murder and Mayhem.
Welcome.
How's everybody? All right. So first of all, let's talk about our sponsors. First of all, Blue 360 Media, greatest publisher ever, medicalessentialdiagnostics.com, where you can go get a complete health screening so you stay alive. That's important, especially for me. I think I stay important. And back here is Riot Tint. All right, riottint.com. They make the window glazing for keeping places safe. All that'll be in the information of the show, but all good products that I say is excellent. So one of the things I want to talk about today is criminal investigation. We talk about it a little bit. We go through some different things, but my book, The Investigation, this is a unique way of telling a police story and teaching. It's a story of a very brutal double homicide that I worked, and I used the story to do the teaching. So I talk about the beginning of the investigation. We wanted to find out how the bad guy got from point A to point B. And then I teach you how you would track him, how you'd find where he was, so you could create a timeline of his movements. Then we talk about, I tell the story of when he went in the house and he murdered two people brutally and what happened. Then we stop and I go back and I teach you everything you need to know about a crime scene, how to protect it, where the evidence is, all that kind of stuff. Very important for you. And then at the end, some strange things happened during the interview process, and then we prepare for the major case trial. So that's all in The Investigation, right? So you can go get that at Amazon. You can pick it up at the publisher, Blue 360 Media. It will help you be a better officer.
And it's told through an interesting true crime narrative too. It's not a boring textbook format. You get to walk through the story and the murder.
Yes. That's and that was the publisher's idea and my idea. Say, how do we do this differently?
Yeah.
How do we bring that alive? Because you just go do A, do B. So I tell it in the story, and it's a true crime story. So
it's a good read.
Let's cover it. What is it you want to talk about?
So I have some questions. So first of all, let's go through our cast of characters for this murder, because this is a local case you worked.
Yes, it is. I worked this case in Monmouth County. What I did for the book and what I will do today is that there are always innocent people involved in these kind of crimes. And this was a brutal thing for the family and everyone involved. So what I do is I've changed the names. Right? Some of you who know me know the real names, but I use the names that I use in the book because I want to protect those innocent people.
Yeah.
I got to be friendly with the family and I got to know them really well. And they're all good people and they suffered a terrible tragedy.
Is that common when you're working a case like that closely, that you get to know the family, the victim's family? And things?
It is, because you get immersed in the situation. And that's something that's a learning point, is that you can be overwhelmed.
I was going to say, does it help or does it hurt to get too emotionally invested?
Well, you get emotionally invested whether you want to or not. The reality is you have to be prepared. If you don't think it's going to happen, it happens to you. And then next thing you know, it can really twist you into knots when you see some of these things that people do to other people. So our cast of characters, what we have here is this family was well known in the community and they were liked. Everybody liked them. They were a nice family. Well, what was interesting is that they were actually a organized crime family.
I heard mob involvement. That was one of my first questions.
Yes. So how that happened was back in the 1950s, the Genovese crime family out of New York needed someone to go down to the Jersey Shore to handle all the gambling and some of the operations down here. So they sent one of their maid people. I changed the name. So he was
the Mazzella family.
The Mazzella family, right? And there was a nickname for Grandpa who came down in the 50s, and he was Bear. They called him Bear, right? Bear. That's an inside joke. Bear Mazzella. And he came down and he handled all the gambling down here, right? And then over the course of time, his son, Robert Sr., became not a maid man. He was an associate. He was a bag man. So he would go all around and take the bets from everybody, right? Then whatever it was, a sports bet or boxing bet, whatever it was, when it was done, then he'd go around and collect the money, or he would pay off if people won. And that was his job. His son, Robert Jr., Robert Jr. was involved with drugs, narcotics, was messed up. He was not allowed to be any part of the family business.
I was going to say that's like a stain on the family is you don't want a druggie in the mob doing your business.
Not only that, but how many times is he going to get locked up? And then he has a chance of saying something he shouldn't say or flipping to help himself, because he's on drugs. So he wasn't allowed to be part of the family business. And me and my partners had arrested him multiple times for drugs. So then there's the grandmother. There was a grandmother, Jennifer. She was 88 years old, and she was living in the family home with the whole family, right? Sweet. It was Robert's senior's mother.
So this is our cast of characters, and then the crime itself. Robert Jr. committed the crime, I'm guessing?
Yes. Crazy situation. So when you involve drugs in your life, right? So Robert and the mother of his child, Tina, they got involved heavily in heroin, cocaine, and their lives were really messed up. And they had a 7-year-old boy. And because their lives were so messed up with drugs, the family had the 7-year-old removed from them and was living with another family member because these two were really a train wreck.
Yeah.
So at some point, Tina realizes she can't go on living like this. She's going to lose her kid. She's going to lose her life, right? You're playing with heroin. So she decides to go to a real heroin treatment place where they lock you down. They lock you down for 6 weeks, no phone calls. You don't leave. You do therapy sessions. You fight the drug addiction. And
you get over the hump.
You get over the hump of it, right? And then after that part, then they let you out. And I think it was in Newark where they were. You go to a halfway house.
Yeah.
You're there for 4 weeks where you're allowed to leave to go to a job and then come home. And after 4 weeks, if they give you the clear, then you go back to your life. And that's really the only way that works with heroin. You can't do these 28-day insurance nonsense. You got to go to a real lockdown. So she decided she's going to do that, but she couldn't get Robert to go with her. He's like, I don't need it. Like most, I don't need that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he really did. So she takes off and she goes to the rehab.
And it worked for her?
And she's in there and she's doing her time. And then at some point, probably 3 weeks later, Robert says, you know what? I better go too, because she's going to be better and then I'm not better and we don't get the kid. So he goes and signs himself in there as well. So they're both locked down, doing treatment. They would see each other passing in the hallway for therapy sessions.
Very romantic.
Well, while they were there, they met another young man from the area in Monmouth County that lived near them. They didn't know him previously. And his name is Joey Tomatoes. We're going to call him Joey Tomatoes right now. They meet Joey Tomatoes, and the three of them become pretty good friends. And they're doing their thing in the rehab, and they're all getting better. Well, Joey Tomatoes came in about the same time as Tina. So they were on the same track, and Robert is 3 weeks behind.
Yeah.
So now it comes time for Tina to discharge and go to the halfway house.
Yeah.
And she gets a job, and she's going back and forth, and then she's released and goes home. So Robert, who's in there, he graduates and he goes to the halfway house. Mm-hmm. Tina's at home. Joey Tomatoes is back at home. And now Robert's allowed to make phone calls from the halfway house. And when he calls home, every time he calls home, who do you think answers the phone?
Joey Tomatoes.
Joey Tomatoes answers the phone. Imagine that.
Tina.
So you can imagine now Robert's thinking in his head that Tina's doing the wrong thing.
That's what I'm thinking.
And he starts to confront her. And what's going on? Why is he always there? And her answer, so listen, we all became friends and we're fighting this addiction. And him and I are going to NA meetings. We're doing all this stuff to keep ourselves clean. Well, you can believe that. You cannot believe that, right? Robert didn't believe it so much. And this is where the crime begins. So in other previous programs, I have talked about want crimes and need crimes. All right. I want crime and drive crimes. And there was a drive now building in Robert because he's thinking his girlfriend, the love of his life, is with another man. He's starting to put that in his head because every time he calls, he answers the phone or she answers the phone. He's in the background. So you get some jealousy.
And paranoia, I'm sure, starts building. And you're in a vulnerable state. You're coming down from your drugs. I'm sure it makes you irrational.
Right. And you can't leave. Right.
Yeah.
You can only go to work and come back or you fail out the program. So what Robert decides to do about 3 weeks in to his 4-week stint, in the middle of the night, he sneaks out of the rehab, gets in his car, and he drives back down to the Jersey Shore. He goes to his neighborhood and he pulls up and he parks about 3 doors down from his family home.
Did he usually do that?
No, you would pull right up in front of your house, right, or in the driveway. But he parked 3 doors down. Why would you do that? Because you don't want nobody seeing you showing up.
Because you're thinking of doing something bad ahead of time.
Well, maybe, and maybe you think about you might be right about that. I think he was going there to try and catch them together. I think that's what he thought. I'm going to sneak in and I'm going to catch them together.
So he's trying to lurk silently, walk up, not pull up and alert everyone.
Exactly. So he pulls up and parks the car, and we're figuring this was probably 3, 4 o'clock in the morning when he got there. Now, it was interesting. We talk about the crime scene stuff. I'll tell you something interesting as we move on. But anyway, he gets there and he does creep up to the house. He goes in a side door where he used to go as a teenager, and he unscrews the light bulb, right, to make it even darker. He opens the kitchen window and he climbs in like he used to do when he was a teenager, and he came home late. Well, in this particular home, they did a lot of cooking, right? The family did a lot of cooking. And there was a pantry right next to the kitchen that he climbed into, and in there was food and all kinds of cooking utensils, including various gigantic knives and blades and all kinds of things, right?
It's a kitchen.
So now you have to say to yourself, he's gonna go confront Joey Tomatoes up there with his girl. So he goes into the pantry and he gets a knife about this long, big old steak knife thing like this for cutting meat. And then one of those things like a comedy. You ever see in a cartoon, the big square meat cleaver thing? Yeah. He got one of them.
It's like from Nightmares, actually thinking about that you walked in and saw the scene and saw what he ended up doing. So
yeah, it was crazy seeing the scene. And when I get to that, we'll tell you that. It was really horrific. It was a horrific scene, and it can cause a lot of ramifications for you when you see these things. You got to be prepared. So anyway, he goes up the stairs. So there's a living room he goes to. There's 3 stairs up. There's a landing, and then it goes up, like another flight of stairs.
Yeah.
Big house. And he goes down the hallway. Now you got to figure this guy's creeping through the house, 4 o'clock in the morning, got these 2 big blades. He's going to confront these people. Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And he gets to the grandmother, Jennifer's bedroom. The door's open, and he hears a TV playing, and he looks in, and there's 88-year-old grandma sleeping. And laying next to her sleeping is Tina. They must have been watching TV together, and they both fell asleep. Well, from our investigation, we know that an argument now ensues. Now, their bedroom, Robert and Tina's bedroom, was right next to Grandma's room. It was a big part of the house. It was a big, giant room. And they end up going in there, and a huge argument ensues.
Between all 3 or between
No, just Tina and Robert. And it's going on and on. The door's closed. Now, what's interesting is that Jennifer, the grandma, had hearing aids that she never wore because she didn't like them.
Yeah.
And she didn't shuffle along too well. She was older, 88 years old. She was a little bit slow. And at some point, and we get this from his interview that he ends up telling us later on, they get into this argument, and Robert ends up stabbing Tina 33 times.
Oh my God.
Now, one of the things that people don't understand is that a multiple stabbing between people in a relationship, whether it's a heterosexual relationship or a homosexual relationship, doesn't matter. When there's multiple stabbings, the knife is like a phallic symbol, which means it's a sexual power. It's not about sex, it's sexual power. You're mine. And his anger came out and he stabbed her 33 times. Terrible.
And that takes so much effort to stab 33 times. You have to imagine how much anger and adrenaline.
How much rage.
Yeah, rage.
Right. Matter of fact, some of the stabs went right through her into the floorboards.
Yeah, they say that happens. And sometimes they can get caught in a bone if it's hard enough, or caught in the floorboard. Yeah.
Yep. So we know that happened. And then we're surmising from his story, what he's telling us, that he does that, and the door opens and there's Grandma. Now, Tina's laying there deceased.
It's not going to end good for Grandma.
And Grandma sees this and says, "Did you kill her?" Because there's a big knife sticking out of the girl's chest. And he says, "Yeah, I did. And she says, "I'm going to call the police." And Grandma turns now, and she's shuffling down the hallway. She just go down 13 stairs, landing.
She didn't play cool at all. She's like, "I'm calling the police."
And she heads out. Now Robert's there looking at this,
frazzled.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine that kind of a chaotic scene that you're involved in?
Calm down from that, yeah.
So whether he went there to kill anyone or not, bringing the knives, you say, why would you do that? Well, maybe he was going to confront Joey Tomatoes, scare him, but he ended up in this argument and killed Tina. So all of a sudden, at some point, he realizes Grandma's gone to call the police, and he runs after her. and he goes down the stairs. He catches her on the landing. Now, his story is he grabbed her and the knife went across her throat.
Accidentally.
And it cut her head off.
Oh, I hate when that happens.
It happens. It's terrible, right? Yeah. But her head comes off and bounces off the landing into the living room. Grandma falls to the floor. Decapitated. Terrible.
Oh my God.
Very frail old woman. At that point, he was a little sketchy on what he did next, but then he went back up to Tina and he cut her head off. Then he cut her hands and her feet off. Then he went back down to Grandma, dragged her onto the rug, cut her hands and her feet off.
Why?
Well, this is where our investigative hypothesis comes in. It was hard for him to talk about this, but we kind of get it. I'll tell you the crazy story he told us, but the real thing and the story he made up. So now he's got them all cut apart, and there's a knock at the door. Now it's about 8:30 in the morning, and who's at the door?
Joey Tomatoes?
No, it's not Joey Tomatoes.
The cops?
It is Grandma's 86-year-old brother, Uncle Tom, and he shows up with bagels and coffee because he comes every morning at 8:30 with bagels and coffee.
There you go.
And with that, Robert actually freaks out, runs outside, doesn't let his uncle in the house. Thank goodness he doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Because there'd be 3 dead bodies. And he's now freaked out. And he says, "Do you have a phone? Give me your phone." And he actually calls the police. Now he calls headquarters. He says, "Here's the address." And we all knew the address because famous house.
Yeah, mob house,
crimes, right? And he says, "There's 2 dead bodies in his house. Send the cops." And they're like, "Okay." He gives the phone back and he's standing there arguing with his uncle because the guy's covered in blood, bones, chunks of meat. The uncle's going, "What's going on? What happened? Where's my sister? Where's my sister?" Well, it was enough of a delay that headquarters put out to the patrols, "Hey, go to this house, reported dead bodies." And at this time in the morning, we were in our detective bureau having our morning briefing. We all knew the address and we assumed Tina and Robert overdosed and were dead.
Yeah.
So we said, okay, we're going to head on out there. Well, in the meantime, patrols roll up and a kid that Robert went to high school with, one of our cops, Officer Tim, sees him and says, "Robert, what the hell happened to you?"
Yeah.
And he says, "I killed her. I killed the bitch." So Tim does the right thing. He sees a guy covered in bones and blood and guts, and he cuffs him up and throws him in a police car and says, "Headquarters, we got Robert here, and he says he killed somebody." Well, 2 patrol sergeants then go in and start searching the house.
Yeah.
And we have, listening to the radio, it's eerie. They're going in and you hear the first officer say, "Headquarters, I have 1 confirmed decapitated adult in the living room." The other cop's upstairs and he goes, "Headquarters, 2nd confirmed decapitated person here. Send the detectives," right? So at that point, we all pack up our stuff and we're running.
Yeah, you're going now.
We're heading there to see what's going on. And we get there, and it's and I tell this part of the story. There was some interesting stuff with the lieutenant in charge. He wasn't very good at stress, and he was barking orders in 15 different directions. And the poor sergeant on the scene finally had to stop and say, "What do you want me to do? You've given me 20 things to do. What do you want me to do?
Give me a priority list."
Right. So we got through that part, and he says to me, "All right, you, Pangaro, you're in charge. This is yours. You're the lead on this case." I said, "Okay." So we end up going into the crime scene, and it was horrific.
Yeah.
It was really bad. Interesting about the hearing aids in Grandma. The family, when we interviewed them later in the morning after we notified them all, was that Grandma never wore those, and she had them in. Her head had the hearing aids in. So we're assuming that the fight must have been so loud, she put her hearing aids in so she could hear, and then she went to the door.
Yep.
Right. So this is how you start piecing these things together.
So it sounds to me like you're getting a baseline of what's normal, where he parks his car usually, where he does. You get the baseline of everything. You look at the evidence, and then you look at what actually happened, and those 2 marry.
And then you put them together and you wipe out the lies and you get to the truth. And that's where a good interview is helpful, right? Mm-hmm. So at this point in our story here in episode 1 of Murder and Mayhem with, the investigation story, we have Robert handcuffed and in the police car covered in bone, blood, and chunks of meat. We have 2 deceased victims inside, and we now have the crime scene, right? So the first thing, the sergeant, patrol sergeant, Johnny on the spot, man, good guy, smart guy. What does he do? He immediately backs everybody out of the house. Once they swept it, there's no other victims, no bad people, secures it. Then he has to decide, what size is my crime scene? Is it just the places where the bodies are? Is it the whole property? right? So here's a good rule of thumb. The rule of thumb, and you can look at another episode when I talk about the crime scene. Good rule of thumb is whatever size you think your crime scene should be, you double it at least.
Why?
Why? Because you can always give up land as you investigate, but you can't go the other way. So now you find out if we didn't, matter of fact, this sergeant took the entire neighborhood, 5 houses around the house,
Wow.
and taped it off. Officers were set up there because the car, remember I told you he parked 3-4 doors down? So in New Jersey, in June, when this was, what time does the sun come up? About?
In June?
In June.
Early morning.
5:30, 6 o'clock at the latest, right?
Yeah.
His car is sitting there 4 doors down and the headlights are on. So what does that tell you about the time he arrived at the crime scene?
Shortens our window.
It was dark, right? So if it got getting right at 5:30 in the morning, he was there before 5:30.
Yeah.
And he forgot to turn the lights off because he was preoccupied with sneaking up to the house.
Yeah. And I picture like you would extend the crime scene because you have a situation like maybe one of them tried to flee and then was brought back. Like there's areas where there's going to be evidence that maybe isn't necessarily in the room.
That's exactly correct. What if on the way there, he dropped a gun?
Right.
What if on the way there, maybe he did something else while he was there and he threw something in his sewer grate? We found evidence in sewer grates and home invasions and everything 3 blocks away. So the sergeant did the absolutely right thing. He took the whole neighborhood. And then as we investigated, we knew the car was involved. Now we could bring in our crime scene to the house, right? So now we have the crime scene, we have the guy under arrest, and we have to get him back to headquarters, and now we have to talk to him. So at this point, you got this brutal scene.
Yeah.
It was hard to see these people decapitated with their heads cut off and their hands and their feet. It was gory.
Yeah.
It was really an ugly scene.
And you don't have there's a difference between you have like a hardworking, like family man lawyer snaps. I feel like you might be able to get more information out of him, but when you're dealing with someone who is like in the throes of addiction and who is in this mental state, I feel like the interview itself is going to just unravel a lot.
Well, we're going to get to that in part 2. So I want to thank everybody for being here, and we'll see you in part 2.
Sounds good. See you then.